Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second part of selection. So, what did we talk about in the first part? We talked about why it is important to select the right employees. We talked a little about negligent hiring. Then we went into the difference between pre-employment tests and during employment tests. We talked about why the good and the bad of having these tests, why they're important, advantages, disadvantages, and then we got into the first big area of testing because everything about that is kind of an introduction. And then we talked about validity and reliability. So whether a test is reliable, is it consistent over time? Those are kind of the three keywords: consistent over time. So that if you give a test to someone today and then you give a similar or the same test, whether it's retest or equivalent, you give someone the same test in 6 months, are they going to do the same on the test? If not, if there's a huge amount of variance between the grade they get today on the test and the grade in 6 months on the same test, obviously the test is broken. It doesn't work. Or a similar test. Where validity is, does the test determine what it is supposed to determine? And that is sort of, you do well on the test, you do good at the job. You know, you do bad on the test, you do bad at the job. That's it. If the test doesn't work, you do good on the test, you do bad on the job, well, then there's no value to this test. It's not valid. And lots of tests are not valid. So we talked about the types of validity, criterion, content, and construct. And then we talked about the 5 steps of validating a test. So the next thing to talk about is this idea of generalizability. Can a test be generalized? So if I make a test that is valid for my job at a law company. So I'm a lawyer and I work at a law firm and I'm doing HR at the law firm, and we have a test that tests honesty and integrity for lawyers, or it tries to whatever extent you can test those things in a lawyer. So we try to test honesty and integrity. Now, can we take that test that is used for lawyers and move it over to a kindergarten or a nursery school and use the same test to test the teachers there for honesty and integrity? Well, if we can, then the test is very generalizable, right? It's general. It can be used in lots of different environments. However, many tests aren't. A test for lawyers might have a lot of specific questions about the law that if you gave it to a nursery school or a kindergarten teacher, they wouldn't really understand. It wouldn't make sense to them. So that test might not be generalizable, but that's really the question here, is can a test, if everyone took the test in company 1 was a PhD, and can you move that test to company 2 where most people didn't even go to high school, right? Is the test generalizable? Something like a Rorschach test that we talked about in the first video, the ink blot test. That is completely generalizable. It doesn't matter where you work or what your age is or what country you're from or your education level. If I show you a picture and say, what does this look like? I mean, that has nothing to do with your education. If you have a PhD, you're not going to see something different. I mean, you're going to see a butterfly or an angel or a skull or whatever it is you see. Okay, next thing to talk about a little bit is in the law of testing. So with employment law and testing, we need to make sure we're avoiding discrimination. We know all about discrimination now, and we understand we have 2 defenses for discrimination: business necessity or BFOQ. So both of those kind of go to this idea of business relatedness. Is it related to the job? And then also we need to be careful of privacy and rights of individuals when we give them tests. So to that end, I can't go back. So, when we talked about discrimination, we talked about BFOQ, bona fide occupational qualification, and business necessity. The idea that sometimes it is okay to discriminate. We don't need to role play. Sometimes it is okay to discriminate. For example, a Christian school can say we're only hiring Christian teachers. Or a nightclub could say they're only going to hire female dancers under the age of whatever, 25, something like that. They could. They have the right. And those would be business necessities. They're not BFOQ, right? At a Christian school, someone who's a Muslim could teach the class, the math class, the history class. You don't need to be Christian to teach that. But because of their values, and even more important, because of their customers, right? If the customers are from families that are fundamentalist or orthodox or very religious, they want teachers who have the same belief system that they have. And if you have teachers who are from a variety of religions, well, they're going to lose their customers. Same for a nightclub. If they hire dancers who are not physically attractive, they're going to lose their customers. So it's a business necessity. But it's not a BFOQ. BFOQ is like a pilot must be able to see, or a bus driver must be able to see well. If you fail a vision test, you can't drive a bus, right? You just can't. Physically, you can't. That's BFOQ. So for testing, we have a similar idea here, which has to do with, does the test discriminate against a group of people? And generally what we're talking about is adverse impact. If you remember, there was impact and effect. Adverse effect was when it's clear discrimination, on purpose. You're saying no white people at this job, no men at this job. That's discrimination. Adverse impact is when you have a test that you give to everybody. It appears to be fair, but in fact, it is disadvantaging one group of people. So it might be that most of the men who take the test don't pass. So if you give a test that is all about, I don't know, something women would know better than men, maybe something to do with, God, what can I say that is not sexist? Something that women know better than men, that if I suggest this, it is not a sexist thing to say. Makeup, I guess. I mean, men would not know as much as women probably would about makeup, I guess. I don't know. We live in a careful world, But so anyway, any test you give, it has to be related to the job. Next, for the legal protection is to make sure that how we give a test is administered correctly. So not all jobs require tests. What are you trying to accomplish with this test? Because you need to clearly define what's the reason for having this test. It could be we want to find people who are honest or have integrity, or people who are strong, or whatever it is. The SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, has said only individuals who've applied for a specific position for which an employer is seeking candidates and who meet the predefined and documented minimum qualifications related to this position. So that's what an applicant is. An applicant is an individual who's applied for a specific job. And the reason we need to know this is if someone is going to sue the company, they say the test was discriminatory or illegal. Sorry, just want to get a thing to cover the keyboard. If somebody's going to sue the company, they need to prove that they are an applicant. Let's say I send a letter today to Microsoft and I type an email, "Dear Microsoft, I want a job working for you." Send. And then they never write back to me and I sue them because I say they didn't take me because I'm a man. Well, I will not be able to sue them because I'm not an applicant. You have to prove that if you're suing a company, you are applying for a specific job. You can't just say, "I want a job at Microsoft." It has to be an open position. You can't apply for a job that they already filled. The employer must be actively looking for people, and I must have the predefined minimum qualifications related to this position. So if the position says you need a master's in computer science, and I apply and I don't have that, I have a JD, a Juris Doctor in law, well, of course they didn't give me the job, and it's not because I'm a man or because I'm white, it's because I didn't have the required qualifications. So these are the things you need to be considered an applicant, and you can't sue a company unless you are an applicant. So this idea also of administration, what kind of requirements do you have for the person giving this test, the Rorschach test, this picture of, whatever you think you see? Can I give that test? Could you give that test? Well, the problem is we are not trained to do this. And we also need very clear rules about who is allowed to give these tests. Now, some tests, as I've said before, like a personality test, that is, you give it and the internet, will determine what is your personality type. Other tests, you actually need to send it back to the agency where you bought it, and they will grade it or determine what this answer means. You might give them a test like house, person, tree is a kind of test, or a complete the sentence test, where you say, like, there are a bunch of sentence beginnings. Like, today John went to the store and bought a, and you have to finish the sentence. And then the answers that you give, they say a lot about your personality. But of course, someone like me, I am not authorized or properly trained to really interpret those answers. So different types of tests require a different degree of training. And according to the APA standard 6.6, responsibility should be assumed by or delegated only to individuals who have the right training and expertise to handle the responsibility in a very professional way of administering a test. So you can give a test to people, but you can't necessarily administer the results. Depends on the kind of test. Publishers, generally when you buy a test, they will indicate on the test how much training you need to be able to interpret this test. Some tests you don't need much training, they can kind of tell you what to look for. And then other tests require years of training, potentially. So employers may select staff to conduct tests as long as they have enough training, or you can send your staff to get training in how to conduct some of these, how to administer and conduct these tests. That's usually a relatively easy way to do it. So we're talking about all of the legal rules right now of giving the test. So it needs to be administered in a proper way. It also needs to be standardized, which means every time you give the test, it has to be given in the same way. You can't give some people 2 hours and some people 6 hours, of course. You can't tell some people you can listen to music and other people you can't listen to music. Some people you can eat, other people you can't eat, right? You have to keep it standard. The same way, the same kind of environment, the same conditions. Morning test should always be in the morning. You don't give it to some people in the morning and some people in the night, right? Generally, you want the environment, maybe the room, the lighting. You just don't want an applicant to be able to sue you and say it wasn't fair because he took it at 8 in the morning and I took it at 8 at night. Or we didn't get a chance to have dinner before, but he had breakfast before and I was hungry, and that's why I did badly on the test, right? You don't want those kind of arguments. An adaptive test is an exception to this. So an adaptive test is more modern. It's on a computer or the internet, and that's a test that adapts. So for example, everybody will have the same section on math. And if I get the answers correct, my next section will be harder math. If you get the answers wrong, your next section will be easier math. The test will adapt to us. And modern tests, like when I took the GRE to get into a master's program, the test was adaptive. So if you do well on the verbal part, it starts to give you harder and harder and harder questions to see how you do, and you get more points if you get those right. If you do poorly, it gives you easier and easier questions to try to average out the scores. So that's an exception. Of course, the environment, it's not exactly the same. People are taking different tests. But you want to minimize. You want to minimize any sort of distortion. And that could be noise, lights, uncomfortable chairs, people who are making noise, anybody who's eating, any foreign smells, if there's something going on outside, if there's construction, or, we want to minimize those different kinds of disturbances and distortions. We also need to make sure we have good security to make sure that the people, the students, the applicants can't cheat, they can't commit fraud. Now, sometimes this does make people upset. For example, if you say, everybody, you need to take your cell phone and put it in the front of the room in this basket. And people say, well, why? You know, I'm not a cheater. I'm going to keep my cell phone. Sometimes people get upset at these rules, or empty your pockets. You have to put your wallets in the front of the class or whatever. You know, but sometimes these rules are very important for fairness, to make sure everything is secure. An example of some test policies that were in our reading, I think this was in the American Management Association chapter. So they talked a little about what are we trying to do with the test, that we're trying to identify certain qualities that are positive or certain qualities that are negative. We want to make sure that we are complying with all the employment laws. We want to know who will be tested, which employees or candidates. We want to know who will conduct the test, who will interpret the results. We want to have a very clear description of the testing conditions, and we want to have a description of all the tests currently used. And all of this information should usually be given to employees, or it's available to them, so that they can see we have all of this written down. If you want to know why we give tests, it's here. If you want to know, do we comply with the laws, it's here. If you want to know, who do we test? We're not just testing people at random. You know, if you want to know how we do the test, how we interpret the test, what the conditions will be, all of this information should be written down for our organization. Next is to talk about the format of the test. So tests could be individual, where everybody takes their own test. It could be tests in a group. That happens also. A structured test is usually what's done where there's sort of a right answer or an interpreted answer. An unstructured test is one that you kind of just, it's like an unstructured interview. You're asking questions right now. So if I meet you, I might say, okay, well, let's start with some math questions, and you just throw them out. Now, let's say I'm interviewing somebody to work in a very small company, and it's my company. And in my company, we do computer coding. So I tell them, okay, well, let me give you some situations. Here's a piece of code right here. I'd like you to look at it and tell me if you see any problems with it. Now, maybe I don't give that test to everybody, but I'm giving it to you. And to somebody else, I say, hey, let me look at my computer. Take a look at this, and it's something totally different. That's unstructured. It's different for different people. I'm just deciding what to test you on now. That only really happens in a very small business. Tests can be spoken, oral tests, or they can be written, nonverbal, or they could be a hands-on performance test, like I said, with a filing test, that you have a bunch of files, or you have an inbox test, where you have a bunch of information and your email, and you have to decide how do you respond to people. There could be a power test or a speed test. Speed test has a specific time limit to see how fast can you do something. Can you do a task within a certain amount of time? And a power test is not about speed. Like an in-basket exercise is what I said, with you have an inbox full of, documents or information or messages, and you need to handle all that information. And then fact versus judgment. A fact test, you're looking for multiple choice and true false. There's a clear answer. Judgment test, it could be personality. It could be how you would analyze a business situation. Okay, now let's start talking about the actual specific kinds of tests. We've talked a lot about making sure that a test is valid, that a test is good, that a test is reliable, why we have tests, the legal way to give a test, who is an applicant, what is the right administration, what is the right security, what are the right procedures. Now let's talk specifically more about the types of tests. So tests can be classified into a lot of different ways. There's all kinds of tests. Generally, we try to put them into 4 categories. So some tests are about drugs and alcohol. We can start with that, and we will start with that. That's just a clear category of tests. Now, drugs could be illegal drugs, it could be prescription drugs, it could be steroids, it's a lot of different things. Alcohol is, alcohol, but there are different ways of testing for these things. Another kind of test is a physical test, and that could be testing your strength, your dexterity, your flexibility, all of these different things that are related to strength. It could be endurance. It could be speed. A lot of things are related to strength, to physicality, beyond just how strong are you, but a physical test. Next could be an achievement test. Achievement tests are usually about knowledge, right? Do you know when you mix this chemical with this chemical, what happens? That's like an achievement test to find out. It's not a personality test, right? You could be a happy person or a sad person or an angry person. All three of those people might know what happens when you mix this chemical with this chemical. It's not based on your personality, it's based on your knowledge. And that is about your achievements. Do you have this knowledge? And then the fourth category is personality, right? And that could be your honesty, your integrity, your extroverted versus introverted nature, all kinds of personality-based things. So one example of a sort of personality test was what's called an aggression questionnaire. This measures anger. And what they did is they did a questionnaire like this, I think it was in Canada, where they did it for students who play hockey. And what they found is the students who scored high for aggression happened to be the same students who spent the most time in the penalty box for, being violent or starting fights. So the test was proved to be, and you should be able to answer this, is that an example of reliability or an example of validity? That the aggression test, the people who scored high for aggression were the same people who actually did commit more aggressive acts. Is that reliability or validity? That is validity, right? If you do well on the test, you do well on the job. You score high for anger, you are angry, right? It's valid. It proves what it's supposed to prove. So let's start about, we could talk about it a little in class, but this idea of drug and alcohol tests and how those are done. So of course, you can do a urine test, a blood test, a hair test. Those are the ones we usually think of. Like for alcohol, there's a breathalyzer. That's where you breathe into a machine. I've never seen one, but it's some sort of machine. You breathe into it and it says your blood alcohol level. Or you can go to the hospital. They will do a blood test, a urine test. Critical tracking is, you've probably seen this in movies, where a police person says, okay, walk in a straight line and touch your finger to your nose, right, while you're walking. Or say the alphabet and, pat the top of your head while you're saying the alphabet. This is called critical tracking. It's just measuring your hand-to-eye coordination and your reaction time. So if you say touch your nose and someone does this, right, they're drunk. But if they can touch their nose, then they're probably not as drunk. And then there's a papillary reaction where you shine light into somebody's eyes to see if their pupil, the black part, expands or contracts. So just like when a cat, gets excited, the black part of their eye, the pupil, just expands. That happens in humans too when you expose it to light. And so they do that to see the reaction time, because people who are, and I think this is not for alcohol, although I'm not sure, actually. I don't think if somebody's drunk that changes their eyes. I don't think so. Maybe one of you guys can tell me. So drug tests, a urine test may indicate illegal drugs, but the problem is with a urine test, it doesn't tell you when the drug was used. So with an alcohol test, alcohol leaves your body pretty quickly. So if you got drunk, last Saturday and today is Tuesday, that alcohol's out of your system. But with drugs, it's probably still going to be in your system for potentially weeks. I don't really know if different drugs have different amounts of time, but I think they do. I think they do. That would make sense. And so there are different amounts of time that these drugs would be in your system. But for a drug test, typically, you want to know if it was used during work hours. And so that's a problem with tests that a lot of applicants complain about. And, did it stop the employee's ability to work, or did it interfere with the work of others, or did it have to do with safety? If you're a bus driver and you tested positive for marijuana, well, they don't know when you did that. Is it bad for people's safety if you smoked 2 weeks ago? No, it's not, or I don't think it is. If you smoked 2 weeks ago, I don't see how that means anything. Probably doesn't mean anything if you smoked, 5 days ago, but it's in your system. So we need to be aware of this for drug tests. It's very hard to determine also who is a user of drugs and who is an abuser of drugs. So you give someone a drug test, you find whatever cocaine in their system or marijuana in their system, you don't really know, does that mean they used a little? Or does that mean they used an incredible amount of it? There's no way, or do they use it every day? So there are problems with drug tests. Also, the idea of a for-cause test, that's the least controversial, where random is the most controversial. For-cause is when you have reasonable suspicion. So let's say that I'm the manager and I go to work and one of the employees smells like marijuana. Now I give that person a test because I have a reasonable suspicion. Or that person is sniffling a lot, and I have a reasonable suspicion they're doing something, they're very jittery and they're very anxious and they're evasive and they're sniffling, and okay, I have a reasonable suspicion that something drug-related is going on. Just testing people randomly is when people start to complain about that. Okay, next is, let's do, what I have next is the psychological tests. Just to finish this off, all companies that want to drug test really do need to have a written policy so that the applicants can see that, they know what the policy is, and they should also get a signature from the applicants so the applicants have consented to be tested. Psychological tests. So that's what I have next, is psychological and personality. So these are all the ways we measure people's brains. We're not measuring drugs and alcohol. We're not measuring how much they know. I guess that's brains too. We're not measuring that, right brain sort of activity. I guess you could say this is more left brain. And we're not measuring their physical body. So measuring general intelligence, what we usually call aptitude. Aptitude is what you can accomplish based on what you know. Achievement is sort of current knowledge. So if I say, what happens when you mix this chemical with this chemical? What happens when you mix them? That doesn't tell me if you're an intelligent person. It tells me that you know that particular fact. So an achievement test doesn't tell us if someone is intelligent. I mean, we could ask them hundreds and hundreds of different questions, and then we could say, oh, you're probably intelligent, but it's not the same as an IQ test. The psychological tests try to measure intelligence and how you apply your intelligence to a fact situation, right? Your application of information. And we do that a lot in university tests, where we ask you to memorize information and then we ask you to apply it to a situation that we give you. And that's aptitude tests. Then there's a whole other kind of psychological test, which is about your personality. So we use projective tests, and we use inventories, and we use graphology, or really the three kinds. So a projective test, and we're going to have some students do a presentation on that in the future, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it more today, but we will have a little bit more to say in the future. But projective, think of, like in a classroom, the projector. So you have a screen in front of the classroom, and here, on the ceiling, you have a projector. What happens? The projector shows an image so you can see it on the screen. And it's similar with these tests, that I could give you a test like that, finish the sentence test. This morning, John went to the store and bought ... and you have to finish it. Now, how you answer that question could tell me a lot about you, or could tell someone who is professionally trained to answer that test. Or I gave an example of the house person tree test. That's a very easy test. You give everybody a piece of paper, and usually I do this in class. So maybe I'll do it with everybody during our tutorial. But I'll ask you to draw a picture of a house, draw a picture of a person, draw a picture of a tree. That's it. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what that means, about your personality, right? So it's something that's a very, very open, please describe this picture. Please interpret this ink. Please, draw pictures or something. And based on that, you're projecting your personality onto the screen of the test. And inventory is much more like the MBTI. It's a personality test where if they ask you a series of questions and you just say like, I strongly disagree, I agree, I somewhat agree, I strongly agree, things like that. Graphology is handwriting analysis, where you can look at someone's handwriting and know things about their personality. I knew one person who was a graphologist. Very, very interesting what they knew. So with a psychology test, what we're trying to measure is general intelligence, not your specific knowledge, but just generally. And this can predict certain behaviors, such as, would you be effective as a manager, or maybe your business ethics. It could measure your emotional stability, your independence. There's a lot of things we can learn from understanding your general intelligence, right? But there are problems with giving people tests like this. And one of the big problems is there's more than one kind of intelligence. So being able to memorize things is a kind of intelligence. Being able to respond quickly is a different kind of intelligence. Being able to take words and create a meaningful story is a different kind of intelligence. Being able to look at a space like the room you're in and look around and say how many square meters is that room. That's a very different intelligence. That's spatial intelligence. Then there's inductive versus deductive. So with deductive, think of that like a detective who looks at a crime scene. So what they're seeing is the end result. They see there's a body, and they see there's some bullet holes in the wall, and they see this crime scene, and from the end, they try to figure out backwards what must have happened. They deduce what happened. We call that deductive logic. Inductive is the opposite way. Think of inductive more like chess. If I do this, you might do that. And if you do that, I can do this. And if I do this, then you might do that. And if you do that, then I can do this. And, looking from where I am now forwards to what's going to happen. Inductive is a kind of, or induction is a kind of intelligence. Some people are very good at seeing patterns, or seeing based on these things happening what is likely to happen. Those people would be very good in jobs that involve prediction. Other people are much more deductive, where they look at a situation now, like the environmental crisis, and they say, well, what led to this? And that's more deductive. Different kinds of knowledge. So there are disadvantages. So for one, these tests are not comfortable. People don't like taking intelligence tests. It makes them very uncomfortable because we have a society that kind of uses this word intelligence like it's one thing. This hasn't really been, if you don't take a class that teaches you about the different kinds of intelligence, and we're just talking about it very, very quickly. But if you didn't take any sort of classes that really talk about the fact that being dumb doesn't mean anything, and being smart doesn't mean anything, because these words are describing a general state when humans don't work like that. Some people are amazing at knowing the depth of water or the space of a room, but they're terrible at reacting very quickly to situations. Are they dumb or smart? I can't tell you the space of a room or the depth of water, but I can react quickly to a situation, like a verbal prompt. Am I dumb or smart? I mean, just, it doesn't mean anything. Dumb and smart don't mean anything. You know, all that matters is what kind of intelligence are you good at? And how do you get better at the other ones if you want to? Because we can. Studies have shown we can improve every kind of intelligence, and improving one kind does improve the other kinds. So sometimes giving these tests sets a very negative tone. People don't like them, they feel it invades their privacy, and people say, listen, you can't really measure intelligence. And it gives us this labels, you know, oh, he has a high IQ, oh, she has a low, I mean, these don't mean anything, you know? It's a very specific kind of intelligence. But of course, we're still going to use the tests because they do still have advantages. It's very cost effective to be able to give people tests and have an idea of their general mental state. It helps reduce turnover because we help to find the right people. It matches their abilities to certain jobs. You know, so psychology tests do have advantages. And I said they might be general tests, they might be aptitude tests of what you can accomplish, they might be more achievement tests about knowledge, or they might be work sample tests. You know, that, for example, would be, if you want to be a teacher, they would say, okay, please walk into this classroom and give us a 15-minute demonstration. Go, teach this class. Start now. Here's your material. You know, that's a work sample test. But it still does show you my psychology to some extent. Okay, so that's psychology tests, IQ, anything related to any kind of intelligence. Next is personality tests. So this is not about being, you know, smart or being intelligent in any way. This is about what kind of a person are you? What distinguishes you from another person? What we're looking for more than anything is job relatedness. We're not looking for someone who's friendly in every job. I mean, it's a good quality, but that kind of quality maybe is most important in like a sales job or a job that involves a lot of communication. Is it okay if you're not the most friendly person, but you're amazing at coding? Could we deny you the job, not give you the job because you tested low for friendliness? It would be hard for us to prove that. You know, because is it related to the job? Sure, we could say it is, but you know, it's an argument that you might make if you didn't get the job. So we have to be very careful. Be very careful because our judgments can be challenged about personality. So again, advantages. Obviously, there's a lot of great advantages. Again, it reduces turnover because we're matching people to their job. You get a more complete picture of the person. And it reduces our costs. Again, very same advantages as giving a psychological test. Disadvantages. Well, for one, like intelligence, personality is very difficult to measure. Another one that's different from psychology is that a personality may change over time. So somebody who's shy now may not be shy, you know, in 3 years or something. Also, it assumes that jobs may only have sort of one kind of personality who's suitable, when that might not really be true. But nonetheless, we are definitely going to, you know, keep using these types of tests. And as I said, the last kind of test, and we'll go through these in a second again, but as I said, the last kind of test is an achievement test, which, you know, I spoke about with psychology. Integrity test is a kind of personality test, you know, to see integrity is about your honesty. Now, a polygraph is a lie detector test. That is mechanical, which means they actually hook you up to a machine. It could be they put, you know, like a sort of cord around your chest to see if how your chest expands. You test your breathing. It could be that they put electrodes on your forehead to test your sweat. It could be that they put something on your wrist to test your heart rate. You know, there's a lot of different things that they can do. Most of this is banned. I've never seen it in China, but it's banned in America. Written honesty tests are still okay. Overt tests is just directly asking people questions. You know, so if you saw someone stealing supplies from the file, from the cabinet at work, what would you do? It's just a direct question. You know, and then a veiled purpose test, which is where you ask people questions that don't seem like they're about honesty, but they seem irrelevant. Things like, what do you like for lunch? And when you go to a store, do you look for the cheapest food, or do you prefer to buy the food you really like? Yeah, if you saw a sandwich and it's a really good sandwich and it says like $5 on it, but actually they marked it wrong and today it says 4, would you say, hey, you marked it wrong? Or and you're trying to like throw them off. As a lawyer, we do that all the time, try to throw people off. And physical, we talked about that. That's anything related to your body, not just strength. So just going back through these again, cognitive is another word for psychological. So the reason I'm doing this twice is because the American Management Association versus the Dessler textbook, they refer to it a little bit differently. Maybe in the future I'll put them together. But for now I keep it, I do the American Management version, then the Dessler version. So cognitive refers to psychological. That's anything related to intelligence or aptitude. Physical is anything related to the body. Personality is your what makes you. And then your achievement is your specific knowledge. So going through these again, cognitive, anything psychological, your intelligence, your aptitude, potentially your achievement, and job knowledge. So we already talked about most of that. We talked about IQ tests. The most common IQ test is called the Stanford-Binet test. I don't know if you took IQ test as a kid, but that's usually what they give in a school. There's something else for adults called the Wechsler scale, and then there's something else called the Wonderlic test, which they started giving. It became popular because they were using it in the National Football Association to test the football players for cognitive decline. But it's a very quick test. You can find that one for free on the internet if you want to take the Wonderlic test. It only takes, I think it takes 15 minutes or something. It's very short. And then aptitude tests test like a very specific kind of mental ability, such as your ability to, in this class, for example, when I've said on your final exam, I'm going to tell you a story about a company, and let's say like the Carter Cleaning Company. That stuff is aptitude. I'm not asking you to remember all of the laws. I'm asking you to take the laws that are on a piece of paper and look at this story about the Carter Cleaning Company and decide which law to apply. That is an example of aptitude. Another example would be mechanical comprehension. So which gear will turn the same way as the driver? If the driver turns clockwise, which gear will also turn clockwise, right? So if you recognize this, that's aptitude. It's not memorizing facts, it's applying them, right? You can memorize the fact that when a gear turns to the right, the gear connected to it turns to the left. And when the gear turns to the left, the gear connected to it turns to the right. That's memorizing facts. Applying it to a picture is more aptitude. Then we have physical ability. The standard physical ability test is called Stromberg for dexterity. And that is the speed and accuracy of very simple, like finger movements or hand movements or arm movements, right? Just testing your dexterity, your ability to move. And it could be your ability to, push your fingers back. It could be your ability to make a fist. It could be your ability to, stretch your arm over your head. A lot of different dexterity tests. Then for personality, generally. So there's an important point here. And the point is, most people are hired based on their resume, their qualifications. So you went to this school and you got this degree and you've worked now for 3 years in another company doing advertising. You are qualified for this job. Most people are not fired because they can't do the job. Most people are fired because their personality doesn't fit with the company. It's that they're not really performing at an efficient or effective level. So this is the result of personal factors, your attitude, your motivation, your personality, your temperament. The Berkman method test is one example of a test that tries to determine your attitude and your motivation to work. And that's a little bit different than what I called a projective test, something that's like projecting your personality. So the Berkman test is more about your motivation, your attitude towards the job, towards a job, where a projective test is more about interpreting some sort of stimulus. It could be a picture, it could be part of a sentence, it could be an ink blot, and you're projecting onto this picture your own emotional attitudes. So I don't know, I don't think here I have the thematic apperception test, but no, I don't, but that's a pretty good example. We study that in organizational behavior when we talk about a scientist named McClelland. And McClelland had a theory of motivation that said people are motivated by three things. They're motivated by their need for achievement, their need for power, or their need for social affiliation, like friends and social groups. And that achievement, power, and affiliation are what drives people. And the way he tested which need are you? I mean, you're not just one, of course, but different levels. And the way he tested this was he would show people a photograph. And, one example of there's a child looking at a violin. So there's a violin on a table and the child is looking at it and that's it. And they say, what do you think this child is thinking? Where do you think this child was before? What do you think this child wants to do? Where do you think this child will go after? How does the child feel? And the point is, most people, they project their own attitudes and feelings onto these pictures. There are a whole lot of different kinds of personality tests. Here's some of the more popular ones I mentioned before: house, person, tree, make a picture story. There's a sentence completion test. There's self-reported surveys. The MMPI is a popular one. Myers-Briggs is, that's more, I said, of a psychology test. Let me be clear about that. The Myers-Briggs is a personality test, but it's not as projective because you're just answering questions. And I will ask you guys to take that for homework. And I'll give you the website later. Okay, so there's one other kind of test I do want to mention, and that is a global competency test. That is measuring your intercultural ability. And that's going to be useful for people like you who are working in other countries. If you're working in a Chinese company and you want to test foreigners, one very, very important question is this foreigner really suitable to live outside their home country? A lot of people aren't. People will come to China. I've lived in China for a very long time, relatively. And there's so many people who come to China and after a year or 2 years or 3 years, it's not right for them and they leave. You want to know this when you hire someone. So what we look at is really three things. One, how do you manage your perceptions? Are you very rigid in your view, like very judgmental about, no, this is the way people should eat. They should eat with their mouth closed and they should use this and they should have a napkin. I can't believe this place doesn't have napkins. How rigid are you in your perception? Because China and many countries are just going to be different than your home country. Second is about managing your relationships. What is the impact you have on other people? And the importance of relationships. In China, as you know, relationships are really, really important and critical. So how do people manage that? And finally, how do you manage yourself? Right? Do you have a stable sense of self? Are you emotionally balanced? Or do things make you very, very upset easily? Or very, very happy easily? So when we're measuring people's personality, with the MBTI and things like that, one of the most common things we use now is called the Big Five. Big Five is a little more used than MBTI. And the reason is the MBTI tells us, are you introverted or extroverted? Are you, I think it's, do you use knowledge or judgment? Do you use perception or judgment, knowledge or intuition? So introversion, extroversion, knowledge versus intuition, thinking or feeling, and percepting, judging. So, or perceiving, judging. Those are the 4 categories. But the problem with it, like for me, I am INFJ. Okay, so I am personally an introvert. I am intuitive. I am feeling more than thinking, and I am judging more than perceiving. And we can go into it when we have our tutorial, what this means. But the problem with the MBTI is it's so, this is a nice word I'm thinking of, but it's polarized. It is black and white. Either you're intuitive or you're knowledge. Either you're introverted or you're extroverted. But of course, people aren't. People aren't 100% this or that. And that's a problem with the MBTI. And so the Big Five says it's not about being this or that. It's just, where are you on the range of introverted to extroverted? Where do you fall here? Are you very, very introverted, like you're over here, or are you over here? Are you over here? Are you over here? Or are you over here? It's all a range for your introversion, for your emotional stability. How agreeable are you to new situations? How conscientious are you? How open are you to new experiences? And different factors or facets of your personality are, applicable to different jobs. Okay, I think I need to pick up speed here. I'm talking too much. Okay, last thing was the achievement test. We already talked about that. What you've learned. It could be a typing test. I would say a typing test is also physical. I think achievement test is more knowledge-based. Like you go to Starbucks and they say, okay, this coffee is, whatever, what's it called? Arabica? Arabica? I forget well, let's say that it's Kona, whatever it is. And they say, where does it come from? And what kind of smell does it have? And, that's knowledge. Okay, let's jump a little bit forwards. We can talk about, the tests. Are they paper? Are they on computers? Are they given to you at a center? There's also testing centers. And then the last big topic here to talk about is interviews. We talked a little about interviews before, but I'm going to go into it a little more detail now. Interviews are obviously very, very important. They're the most common form of selection, is interviewing people. You ask people questions. So there are 3 things I want you to know about interviews: structure, type of questions, administration. So with structure, okay, that really just asks a question: is this interview planned or not planned? If it's planned, then you know what questions you're going to ask, and you know what is a good answer for you. If you say, like, tell me, when your customer complains, what would you do? Now, if you ask that same question to everybody and you kind of know what you think a good answer is, that's structured. Unstructured is you just ask it as they come to your mind. You ask different questions to everybody. There's no question that studies have shown that structured interviews are more effective because you get a better comparison between people. What kind of questions would you ask? And we talked about this a little, but I do want you to know the 3 types of questions. So one is situational. A situational question is hypothetical. It's not a fact. It didn't really happen. How would you react if? I'm not saying it happened. I'm just saying if. Imagine you're a CEO. Imagine that you're a senior manager. You're not, but imagine that you are. That's hypothetical. That's situation. Behavioral is fact. Did you ever have a situation where you came in late? How did you handle this? I'm not asking for a theoretical situation. I'm asking for a factual situation. Behavioral is fact. And then finally, a basic knowledge or background question. What math course did you take? When you mix this chemical to this chemical, what happens? That's just a knowledge question. So that's structure, types of questions, and the last one, administration. So we talked about administration before in terms of, do you have the right person to give the test? Is it standardized? Is it always given the same way? Is it safe and secure? That kind of thing. Now what we're talking about is the way you give people a test. Is it one-on-one? Most interviews are. Most interviews are, I'm the boss, you're the interviewee. But it doesn't have to be. It could be a panel. I've had interviews where there were 5 people and me. That's a panel interview. There are good things and bad things about that. You know, it's good because you get 5 different people can interview you at the same time. That saves a lot of time. But the problem is you do get some bias. Maybe I have a question I want to ask, but somebody else, I feel uncomfortable asking that question around them, or so, you know, maybe I won't ask you. And so you get some problems with panel interviews. Also, the person who's being interviewed can get very nervous. Sequential interviews are actually probably the best. And that's where you're interviewed, that's where you have rounds. So, you know, you come to me and you're interviewed by me first. And if you pass the interview, then you're interviewed by the senior manager. If you pass that interview, then you're interviewed by the CEO. If you pass that interview, then, you know, so having 3 rounds or something of interviews. Some people use phone interviews, and this benefits to phone interviews. Because if you interview someone on the phone, you can't see them. There's no like, oh my God, this person's so handsome or so beautiful, I feel a little nervous. Or look at how expensive their suit is. Or wow, they shook hands really weird. I don't, you know, there's none of that. It's only hearing them. So there are benefits to that. Obviously, these days with technology, we can use Zoom, we can use Skype. Already, those things are popular. Some employers use a sort of speed dating method. It depends on the job, but you know, you have 800 people who want the job, 400 people show up, and then you just do these quick interviews. You see that at a lot of university campuses, that you'll have 5-minute interviews during a employment fair or something like that. Okay, anything else I want to say about that? No, not really. We'll jump through this for the moment. Situational questions have a higher validity, interestingly. So remember, what is situational? That's, I give you a situation. Imagine if you were a, you know, that's situation. Behavior is tell me what you did. And actually, situational questions are more valid. So if I say, imagine if you have an employee who comes late 3 times, what would you do? Not what did you do, what would you do in that hypothetical, fictional situation? Those questions tend to be the most valid. Structured interview of any kind is more valid than an unstructured interview because they're all going to be different. One-on-one interviews tend to be more reliable than panel interviews. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, last big thing that I do need you to know is this idea of mistakes. You know, that there are different mistakes. Well, there's one other thing, but there are different mistakes we need to be careful of when we're interviewing people. And these are different kinds of bias. So I'd like to go through these, you know, pretty quickly. So a snap judgment is, of course, when someone walks in the room and in the first 30 seconds, you're like, I like this person, or I don't like this person. We have to be careful of that because it happens all the time. We always look on the internet and see this, you know, hiring managers make a decision within the first minute. You know, we always see these things on the internet. It's not necessarily true. Definitely it's true that people make an impression quickly. So you want to dress nicely, you want to be on time, you want to smile. I mean, there's an impression, but it's not a decision. And a good HR manager understands, I do not trust my impression. It might give me some guidance, but it's not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna hire someone just based on that. But we have to be careful of that. Negative emphasis, number 2. Negative emphasis means that a hiring manager in HR is always looking for the bad things. Now, what that means is, imagine that you're the HR manager and I come in, I'm the first person you see today. You have 10 interviews today for this job, and you have 10 tomorrow, you have 10 on Wednesday, you have 10 on Thursday. You're going to see like 50 people this week, and you're only going to hire 2. I'm the first person you see. Are you going to give me the job? Probably not. Because your thought, of course, is going to be, well, but I don't know who I'm seeing after David. What if there's somebody amazing on Wednesday? What if there's somebody even better on Thursday? So what's happening is every time someone comes in, one of your thoughts is, well, what if there's someone better after him? What if the person after him, yeah, he went to a good school, but what if the person after went to a great school? Yeah, he has good experience and I like him, but what if the person after has amazing experience? So in HR, people are always kind of looking for this. They're looking for what's wrong with someone, not what's right with someone. And we need to recognize that about ourselves when we're interviewing people, that we're going to be looking for what's wrong if we're interviewing a lot of people. Not knowing the job. Many interviewers don't have a job analysis or job description. They don't really know the job. And of course, that leads to errors. Pressure to hire. So if the interviewer has to hire 10 people today, and I've seen a lot of examples of this in China, if they have to hire people soon, the boss says, okay, we need 10 new salesmen and I need them in 5 days. Well, come on. There's so much pressure that they're just gonna make errors and mistakes in who they hire. So, okay, they hire 10 people, they don't care who. And then this person, gets trained for 2 months and they get health care and then they quit. It costs the business so much money. Candidate order is the next one, also known as contrast error. And this is an interesting one. So there was a study done in America of people who went to court who were going to go to jail. Sentencing. The judge was going to tell them how long they're going to jail. And what they wanted to test was for the people who see the judge at 10 o'clock in the morning versus right before lunch versus around 2:30 in the afternoon versus right before the judge goes home. And what they found is, and this is kind of terrifying in that case, the people who saw the judge right before lunch, the judge often gave them years longer in prison. Why? Because the judge was hungry. He was hungry, he was angry. He didn't think about it. It wasn't on purpose. It was totally subconscious, totally unconscious. And same before he went home. And this is true of everybody, in every situation. You never want to have an interview at, 5:45 p.m. when they just want to go home and you're the last person. They just want to get through it. Or if it's lunchtime, they just want to get through it. You always want to see someone, if you can, at around 10 a.m. or around 2 p.m., right? Those are about the times, 2:30, 3, 10, 11, 10:30. Those are the key times you want. You really don't want to see someone, right before lunch or right before the end of the day. Influence of nonverbal behavior. Of course, how you walk, how you act, how you hold your body. Do you sit like this? What do you do with your hands? Are you talking, covering your mouth? Are you smiling? All of those things have a lot of effect on an interviewer. Attractiveness. Attractiveness has a very serious effect on interviews. And as an interviewer, you need to know this. As a manager, you need to be aware that you might make errors based on how pretty or handsome someone is. And finally, ingratiation. Ingratiation is when someone tells you nice things about yourself. So, someone comes to my office and I'm interviewing them and they say, oh, wow, David, is that your diploma on the wall? Wow, that's an amazing school. That's really cool that you went there. Or, wow, is that a picture of, you and your son? He's so cute. Wow, like, how old is he? When it's like, okay, I see you're being nice, but stop trying to butter me up. Stop trying to ingratiate yourself. or make me feel good. Okay, so this is what I want you to know. You can read these after if you want, but it's the same thing we just did. I'm sleepy now. Okay, I know we're over an hour. There's one last thing I wanted to talk about, and that would be this, background checks. So you do need to do background checks on a lot of candidates in HR. Generally, we ask them to sign a consent form so that they know. What kind of things are we checking for? We're checking for when they've worked in the past. When they say they've worked, was it true? Maybe their education, their identification, their credit, their social security number. We're going to check their references. All of this stuff is considered a background check. We can do it by phone. As I said, usually you ask them to to consent. And then finally, I would say we also these days will use social networking. Facebook, Weibo, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, WeChat, whatever we can use, to find out about people. There's a little bit of other stuff that has to do with honesty testing, but that's, it's not big stuff. I think we got through everything. I know this is a big subject, one of the bigger ones. So, okay, we will leave it there. I will see you guys